too juicy too soon, so we might as well just start it going. Are we on episode 5? Or is this 4? I think it's 4.
How's the volume sound on your guys's?
I can hear you good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, episode 4, High Mark Podcast.
Let's go.
We have the great Alex Flanagan. We got Ty/Howard Flanagan, and then myself, Jesse Carstairs. So yeah, if any crazy updates with the Trump indictment happen, you gotta let us know.
Kind of not listening to it, so I'll try to pay attention every once in a while.
So a couple things regarding Trump is, did you see how many views him and Tucker Carlson got last night?
Did you watch that interview? Yeah, it was pretty good. It was pretty interesting. As all Trump interviews go.
Was it very like long format, traditional, like kind of?
No, really, it was like 45 minutes, I believe. And it was just kind of like it looked like a pre-recorded one where they kind of did it all beforehand or something. So.
Oh, it didn't look live?
I don't think so. Because they were doing like promotions of the clips beforehand. So I don't think it was very live. Yeah. I could be wrong.
I'd be curious to see what the viewership was for the Fox debate.
Mm-hmm.
Because they ran it at the same time, from what I heard.
Yeah.
And at one point, he had 173 million views.
Yeah, I think within like 2 hours, it was in something crazy in the 30 millions or something ridiculous. It's like within a couple hours or 22 minutes or something ridiculous like that. It's like, man, so those are only impressions, right?
They were analyzing the debate after they said it was higher than expected viewership, but they didn't give numbers.
Okay. Yeah.
So
higher than expected. I mean, I heard Vivek Ramaswamy from like a lot of the polls and stuff I saw on Twitter. He freaking did really good.
Oh yeah, he had one of the fiery things of the night. They were referring about climate change, and he said, "I'm the only one on stage not bought and paid for," and the whole crowd was all boo.
Yeah, that was a good one. That was a good line.
I did see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I
he
saw
came out
him
swinging,
being like the only one who said that he would just pull out of the Ukraine war and just like stop the funding.
That, and he was like the first one to raise his hand when the people were asked if they would vote for Trump or something like that.
Oh, support the nominee.
Support, yeah.
Yeah, his hand went sky high.
Mm-hmm.
And then like DeSantis did one of these. And then you
everybody
just saw
else
everybody else go, oh, I guess I have to say yes.
Okay. Because right as Vivek raised his hand, the crowd went, whoa, they all went crazy. So
and then in those earpieces of everyone else, they were probably like, raise your hand, raise your hand, raise your hand.
So sure.
Oh my God.
For sure.
Yeah.
Alex, fill us in on the Russian situation with Wagner really quick, because I want to, we were talking about it via text yesterday, but I want to fill you in on what it was that I was under the last impression. Again, this is a month ago. So you fill us in on the most recent developments.
So during the uprising, he went on national TV in Russia and accused Prigozhin of being a traitor. Then immediately after that, he said that all's good. He's going to go into retirement, so to speak. But anyone that Putin's ever called a traitor publicly has never survived. And everyone, foreign policy analysts always assumed right from that get-go that he was doomed, no matter what. Even ones that have made it to the West, like there was a big critic of Putin who made it to London, so he escaped out of Russia. He was actually poisoned with polonium, which is like a radiation that if you get poisoned by it, there's no saving you, basically. You're going to die. But nobody else in all of London got it. So it's amazing. It's amazing how just he got poisoned. So Navalny is a unique situation, but he actually has enough ground support that it was easier to just jail him than to have him fall out of a window, as they say. But they did extend his punishment for another 20 years. So he was already convicted for a long time, and then they just like, and that's a great example to me of how important the American principle is of being charged and convicted of a crime one time. Because
Mhm.
if not, you can play these games forever, and essentially you'll never escape the system unless there's clearly defined rules about how many times you can be punished for the same crime or put on trial for it. So I think that's a very cool thing about American uh, legal system. But with that said, I can only say that at this point they don't know exactly how it was done, but it was within Russian airspace, and some are saying that perhaps it was like an explosive put on the plane. And as of right now, they don't have any proof that it was shot down from a surface-to-air missile like a Stinger, the Russian equivalent of the Stinger. And I think at this point it's pretty clear that he was, taken out for what happened in March. And so what was happening during the Twitter thing, the Twitter Spaces, we were all following it, and I was following it as well. And at the time, Wagner's forces were moving towards Moscow. The whole intent, and this has happened before in history, where many commanders of armies they don't want to take out the king. They love the king. They love the emperor. The lackeys around him, like in China and other cases, it was like a unit. So these cabals around the emperor had power, and they were trying to, in honor, to remove them, not the emperor. But it's always perceived when that happens as an attack against the emperor, and so if that's the case, they always never make it unless they overthrow the emperor himself. So I think that was unfortunately from the moment he went towards Moscow, that his fate was sealed unless he was going to go all the way. That's my take.
So back in what was it, early spring, when the Wagner Group was marching towards Moscow, the LA Times reported that there was reports of a $6.2 billion surplus in the military funds expected to be sent to Ukraine that the CIA sent to the Wagner Group because in support of them going into Moscow. And then they never actually invaded Moscow. And so then there was reports saying that Putin and how do you say his last name? Prigozhin?
It's a tough one. It's a tongue twister for
Prigozhin. But that Putin and Prigozhin were pretty much just laughing and splitting this $6.2 billion because he used to work for Putin, like personally, and then he went to prison, and then all of a sudden he's this high-ranking person. But at one point he was like a cook or something for Putin.
Yeah.
And that they had split this money. So then when I heard that Putin had him killed, it's like, well, then what happened from then till now? Which is what I'm curious. How does the LA Times know that the CIA gave them the $6.2 million? I don't know, but there was multiple reports about that the Wagner Group got it.
I would say that the amount of evidence, especially with past political opponents of Putin, shows more that it's probably that than perhaps a CIA failed attempt to have Wagner overthrow him. But I mean, that's totally possible. But I would just say at this point, the amount of evidence, including past political opponents already assassinated by Putin, is, at least to me, would indicate that it's more likely a break. And Prigozhin genuinely, I believe he genuinely believed he didn't want to actually overthrow Putin, and that they were on good terms. I think he actually really did want to because the whole thing, he got on a video before the uprising and said that it's the military commanders who have absolutely ruined this war and their corruption has ruined the Russian military. And so he absolutely was like, I'm going to get rid of those guys. He never once said he was going to get rid of Putin. And
he was saying that they weren't doing enough in Ukraine, correct? Like they weren't
right.
They weren't actually making enough ground. So he was upset about that. in that case, right?
Right, and the reasons why they were making so poor ground was the corruption,
Right.
et cetera, et cetera. And just they were taking money from Putin and they weren't getting results for him, so he was upset about that. And so he did march in there and um, start to move his troops. And also, even during the uprising, it's often not known that half of Wagner didn't go. So half of them didn't refuse. A section, the Wagner forces were split. Some wanted to go with Prigozhin towards Russia, and the others refused to follow his orders. So that itself caused already issues for Wagner. But if they all had moved as one, that might have been so bad for Putin that they might have had a fight right there. But instead it worked out to how it worked out. And at first, it was going to seem like he was going to go into exile, maybe just be in Belarus, and they disarm him, they remove him from Wagner. He would just be pensioned off, so to speak. But no opponent of no opponent of Putin has survived that after, and all the a lot of people who had studied Russia said he's already his fate is sealed. So. At that point, and here we are now, and it's just the kind of thing that if we had seen that kind of behavior before, and then now here we are with him dead now again, another political opponent, you kind of have to, it does lead that way a lot. So but anything's possible. Absolutely, it could. We need more evidence, and it's so hard to get in Russia. But I would definitely say it far leans way more towards him being assassinated by the Russian forces than some other things.
Yeah.
So then I got to ask you both. When we look at the Russia political opponent situation, they are more of the wild, wild west. Literally. And then when you look at the United States, we're not so wild, wild west. But do you guys feel that with the latest Trump indictments, it is political targeting? You're targeting your political opponents, because if they wanted to bring on any of these indictments, couldn't they have done them 2 years ago? Couldn't they have done them 1 year ago? Why are they waiting as we're going into an election?
For sure, yeah. These are warning signs that we've seen for some time, that it's moving towards when things become politically divided so much and tribalized. Inevitably, the next stages is political show trials, et cetera, et cetera. And in this case, Putin represents the most extreme of that, actually, where he puts on show trials for his political enemies, he executes them, and all those things. We are heading in that direction, for sure. And this is exactly an example of that, for sure. The time, I would always say, for a good case, get your case together takes time, but the timing is absolutely, I'm sure, timed, and so they do have discretion on that to a degree. So I would definitely say it sure does look like they're timing it so that for maximum political impact against Trump.
Also, to add on to that, so I don't know if you guys have heard, but the Biden administration has decided to sue Elon Musk for some immigration policies regarding his work or something like that. But it's kind of interesting how it's all interconnected around this time, where X is like the only platform where people are allowed to actually freely say their political feelings, right, at this point.
For sure.
So it's interesting that just the timing is all coming around at this point, where they're putting pressure on Musk, they're putting pressure on Donald Trump, which is interesting.
They absolutely do, and traditionally, and for the state to work as best, these institutions need to be separate from political seasons. These kind of, if you're using state resources to further put your opponent on the back foot, then inevitably you turn into a banana republic, and you get with all the chaos and financial problems that follow. So we're definitely heading that way. I would say it's looking like that. If the Democrats can stand on their own 2 feet on their own policies, they don't need to do any show trials. They don't need to do any trickery using state resources like this. They can stand on their own 2 feet if their policies stand, and the people will vote accordingly. But you start down this road, then inevitably each party has to do that until they're trying to seize power outright.
That's what I'm
And
afraid
that's
has been started at this point. The
For sure.
the first domino has been pushed over, and now it's just going to keep snowballing until we have public executions again, or guillotines and crazy stuff. Bring the insane stuff back.
For sure.
With the showcases, it's like, okay, sure. With the showcases, it just reminds me of the, what is it, Ghislaine Maxwell case with the Jeffrey Epstein.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, James Comey's own daughter was the prosecutor in the case. The judge was an elected official to the Obama administration. Could that be by chance? Probably. But someone was given jail time where she had actually no direct links to a case, and that there was no investigation further into that case. It was merely for show, to say, yes, somebody went to jail.
The whole thing just blew my mind. How there was someone put in jail for that, but nothing else came out of that. How does that make any sense?
It was merely, she was almost put in jail for merely having conversations with these girls and being an associate of his.
But for what? If
for show.
No, but like,
I get what you're asking.
Before that, where's the proof that all happened? Because I would like to see, and I'd like to know who.
By implication, all the people that visited that island had conversations with him, and I'm sure people there. So wouldn't all them be like Bill Gates? Wouldn't they all be put on the same level as Maxwell here, or her? If they are doing,
that's what I'm kind
what
of getting to. Like the list, there was. Supposedly, the FBI had an entire list of actors, politicians who had visited this island multiple times. Jeffrey Epstein was paid millions of dollars by multiple of these guys for advice. Do you know that he had in his house, he had a painting of Bill Clinton naked with like other people in this painting? And it's like, okay, that's weird. But is it like a reminder of, I always have blackmail on you? Now I'm just like throwing out just fucking random thoughts. Not saying that any of that's factual. But when he is on the list for visiting multiple times, and then in his house he has this grand painting of him fucking naked on a couch. What is that about?
Well, that's the power of implication. You could even imply that I have much more on you, Bill. And
exactly.
So, those kind of things could be, you don't need to overtly say, I got a bunch of videotape and be all upfront and confrontational about it. Just kind of symbolize with a nice thing to remind you to toe the line.
So my whole thing is like, you think of like the correlation of all these people that have visited there and what they've been accomplishing previously, right? So like all these people who have like gotten all these great movie deals and gotten all this stuff, it's like, I just am curious how interwoven all that is. Not to get too crazy conspiracy theory, but it's interesting. There's just a correlation between all these people and success somehow.
I do imagine that there's definitely friends meet each other at these events, and then they invite each other to other things, and soon it becomes more than that. I will say also that historically, the rich and wealthy have bizarre sexual appetites and bizarre things. So that's not as particularly new or specific to the Democratic Party. You can read about Roman emperors, and some of them are just absolutely ridiculous. So I think it's not necessarily specific, but definitely the elites they need to be held to account. I don't really care if they're Democrat or Republican, but if you're doing gross shit, you need to be held to account. That's,
and for clarification, Bill Clinton was not naked. He's actually in a blue dress with white or red heels. He's dressed in drag.
Right. And so you can see as an ex-president, that alone would be a kind of reminder. Let's say if he has actual video of something truly deviant, then that would kind of remind Bill every time. Like, keep this to the house.
Bill's past record isn't that great as far as
even his exposed record.
Yeah.
So you can imagine
public record. Yeah.
And like according to the New York Post, which I don't know if we want to trust the New York Post or not, but they've actually are the oldest publication that's still around. They said that Clinton flew on Epstein's private jet 26 times. Epstein visited the White House 17 times while Clinton was president. So yeah, they knew each other somehow.
There's also
again, it doesn't matter about the politics because there are Republicans who are doing this too.
Right, those pictures of Epstein with Trump and everything. But I think there was that movie star related sex ring where they were doing weird shit as well, and it was like they got all convicted and one of the actresses got some jail time stuff. I can't remember the name of it right now, but I'm sure you could easily look it up with it's just that kind of stuff, they get in little clubs and get all weird and stuff. And if they are doing deviant and illegal shit, they need to be held to account. I really don't give a shit if they're movie stars or politicians, or I think it's the fact that we're all upset as the average American that they seem to have an immunity even though they're doing bizarre shit. That's the really root to me of where QAnon and all those kind of things are happening, is at the root we're not seeming to punish those who should be punished. And that just ain't right. Some about it just doesn't fit right, and
Yeah, I think
it's unsettling.
When you have so much money and when you just have so many things, it becomes to a point where like nothing can satisfy you, so you have to get into some weird ass shit like that.
Right.
I think so. That's like it's an interesting thing that we should pay attention as humans. I know there's not all like that, and obviously not all rich people follow that pattern, but it's a natural progression for when you have so much overload of so much everything that will just naturally happen.
Absolutely. And Marcus Aurelius is a good example of where you have all the power over everyone, and you exercise it wisely.
Restraint. Yeah.
Exactly. Tiberius is that example I always cite because he was notorious for at the end of his life just being an absolute sexual monster. And guess who was the emperor that followed him and spent time with him in Capri? Caligula. So he was raised to see all this stuff and then kicked it up a notch. And of course, Caligula is known as one of the most notorious ones ever. So these kind of behaviors, when you have all this absolute power, is just they turn into monsters sometimes. They don't always. Marcus Aurelius could have done that. He could have, but he didn't. He chose not to. And many of them didn't. But some of them did, for sure. And
like you're saying, it increases the chances that will just continue.
I think that's fair. It increases the chances if you have all this money power that you might become deviant, and then also that you're going to be free from actually being held to account for your bullshit.
It's like a feedback process, fortunately.
Yeah, it makes me definitely skeptical about our current justice system. I mean, I feel like the way that the Democrats are going after Trump, it only validates if he as president would have started it and gone after Hillary, but he didn't. And then who knows the next president, if he goes after the Biden administration for things, and then it's just this never-ending cycle of, well, you guys did it, so we're going to do it.
That's a great example, even like the conflict that erupted in Sudan recently. That's exactly what's happening in most of the countries of the world that don't have strong economies and strong political systems and strong militaries, is they are caught in a constant feud of powerful men and people in their countries who are constantly just churning all the nation's resources into combating each other instead of outward or upward. And we are facing that exact potential in the United States. They used to talk about American exceptionalism and that the state structures was above that, but clearly we're leaning towards those same kind of things that afflict a lot of the world. And a lot of these countries would do so much better if they weren't afflicted by this tribalism. And that's why I constantly argue against it and try as much as I can to warn everybody I can against it, because it feels good to be tribal, but it will destroy what makes us awesome right now. And your opportunities and prosperity opportunities will get destroyed. And it's like you didn't see the forest through the trees, and you missed while you're trying to pursue your enemies.
So true. And it takes a very different kind of view to be able to like kind of go in from that viewpoint and see it, because it's so easy to get locked into your little tribal like
Absolutely.
viewpoints. So
And
easy.
I think we're moving somewhat against the history of mankind, in that for hundreds of thousands of years it was tribes oriented, and the tribe leader, the king, and also that the tribe was an enemy. Other tribes were enemies, and so we're trying to actually like rise above that with modern political systems. And boy, is it hard. We thought it would be so easy. They wrote all these papers and say, "Oh, we're past that now." But I've never really bought that. I think we're going to have to constantly struggle against that, because mankind's more initial thing is to fall back into tribalisms than not.
Yeah, it reminds me of what that biologist was talking about. He's talking about how there's like a continuum of individuals and collectives that across everything. So look, within atoms, within humans. So there's like the individual, we're the individual, and then there's a collective, like the government, nations and all that. So it's like there's this continuum levels of individual and collectivism that we need to figure out and be aware of, because if we just think in the individual way, that's not going to work out, because the collective version of us isn't going to prosper, right? So, and that's down from the the state level to the federal level to the cosmic level. It's
to the personal level, how much individualism, and then how much do you need to be part of your community? Even and of course individual collectivism have a kind of representation in socialism and capitalism, right? And then a balance between them, and how far can each one go before they become unmoored from any useful tools.
Exactly.
Yeah, to go to with a little bit more like simplistic version of what you're saying, I heard a guy say something about his political views that I thought was very good. He said it on a family level, I'm a communist. In my neighborhood level, I'm a socialist.
Right.
And then he goes, and then on the like city level, I'm a Democrat, because you want to help your city. He goes, at the state level, I'm a Republican, and at the federal level, he goes, I'm a libertarian. And if everyone had that mindset, it's us being a community in our tribe and helping out one another across the nation, and you don't need government to come in and do it for us.
Right.
But if we just had that sense of community.
And you have to be aware of what stage you're at within that hierarchy. So you have to understand what is necessary for each hierarchy, and it's not just a one-size-fits-all kind of scenario where we think it's so simple, where it's just capitalism or it's just communism kind of thing. It's never that simple.
The hybridness of the systems has proven to be pretty effective, at least so far. Maybe in the future they might come up with something better, but at the moment, I think I look back to some of the histories I was reading about recently. Khrushchev in the Soviet Union, and just like the story of his life and stuff. And it got me thinking about that stuff. And like, it's just, people were so passionate about communism because the idea of us all sharing the huge amount of the wealth of the country together, it's a great thing and an idea. And it created very passionate people. But unfortunately, it's been tested in every type of culture and every way across the world, and it just doesn't work. And I think it's in a way unfortunate that it's failed so spectacularly, because it's a great idea. This idea that we can have all this community together and share this all together, but it just simply doesn't work. I mean, they've had every chance to test it, and it just doesn't. Time and time again.
So true. It's so true. It's like at face value, I think everybody is open or wants communism. Just the idea. Right. But it's like one put into practice, it doesn't seem to ever fully
Latin
work
America, East Asia, Europe. I mean, vastly Africa, vastly different cultures, vastly different original cultures, vastly different economies, and some were like sold minerals. Others did manufacturing. They had every different type of possibly combination you could, and they all didn't work. It tells you
to
that
say,
the system itself doesn't.
Yeah, and then to say that communism wasn't done right. Have you ever heard that? It's like,
right.
Yeah,
they've had many chances, and how many chances do you need, bro?
Yeah.
It's like,
And how-
it's getting a little ridiculous when you make
Yeah.
that point.
And how do you do it right? Is my question. If like the founders couldn't even do it right, if the people who came up with the idea couldn't even do it right, I don't know how you do it right.
And of course, it's great to point out that even communist China is that name in name only. The way that they become the second largest economy is to adapt the market system. Yeah. So there is no actual large communist state left on Earth that functions. So that's, if China gave up on it, probably the one best chance, the most collectivist society, I think most people would agree, historians and stuff would agree. If that can't work there, then your probability, maybe nothing's impossible, but your probability of it working in pure communist form is not going to work.
Yeah, China got rid of, well, I'm going to say, communist aspects to their economy.
Right.
Because they still dictate what you do for a career, depending on which province you live in. So, like, they will tell you you're going to be a dentist, and they will cap your income, though.
Right.
So they will say all dentists can only make, we'll just say, $100,000, and you cannot make any more. If you are caught making more, you can go to jail. But like Hong Kong, they've always been trying to bring in Hong Kong, but like they're way more free than other parts of inland China. But they definitely still have some communists. But when it, like you were saying, they were open to bringing in these capitalism aspects when it comes to generating revenue.
Absolutely. Yes, there's special economic zones. China's so massive with such population that it's like it would be overgeneralizing to say they went full capitalist in their economy. There's still very large state-owned enterprises that guide a lot of policies and stuff like that, far beyond any American equivalent, like say oil companies, etc. And also there's even special economic zones. So like some regions have much more liberalized market systems, and then others ones, like you said, in the provinces, actually have still very pre-planned structures, surprisingly so. It's amazing that the two can even, function, but I think there is growing gaps often and problems between them, and they just smother money to kind of smooth it out. But, at the end of the day, there's like, it's not even full capitalist. But to me, it represents that the fact that they gave up even pre-planning the whole economy altogether just is kind of like they're really nothing communist except in name now. And they still want to control everything like a communist Soviet Union, but they no longer have actually, they've accepted the Soviet Union way of economy simply won't work for them either, which is, shocking.
Yeah. So they just become a totalitarianism in that sense, where they're
named the Communist Party.
With a comma in parentheses.
It's just the name, they kept the branding, but ditched the actual thing.
Hypothetically, what do you guys think would take for communism to actually work in practice? If you were to like have any
remove
kind of
the humans.
Yeah, we've talked. I think we talked about before. It'd be interesting to see if AI could pre-plan the market structure and see if it could really do it. Because often what would happen is this becomes cronyism. Like with Khrushchev, if I'm the boss, then inevitably I want to get my family and everybody in all the major positions, give them all the major resources, control the resources, these kind of things inevitably. And that's one of the things that plagues every one of them, including Cuba and everything. They just can't seem to be truly neutral. Another issue I've always thought that's an interesting thought experiment is the market dynamic of supply and demand and how hard that would be to pre-plan in reality. And I always use that example of like, say I'm allocated 2 tacos every day, but then like it's a Wednesday and like I just feel like 4 tacos. You know what I'm saying? And market demand would say, if the demand's high a little bit, I'm going to pay a little more for them 4 tacos. But if it's already pre-planned and I only have 2 tacos for you this week, well, there you go. And so you have to start doing some bartering. You have to do a bunch of black market stuff, or things get weird, and you're really not using the market dynamics to the best and most optimum ability. You're now moving away from that, into some kind of other thing. And the black markets in Soviet Union were vast as a result. Nobody was actually happy with 2 tacos. They wanted 4 tacos sometimes.
That's the human
So,
nature that Jesse's referring to, I believe.
Yeah,
absolutely.
and so
Yeah.
to go further with the human nature aspect, if you took all the money from every U.S. citizen, just every U.S. person in the United States, and made everybody even today, and we had a free market capitalism, all the money would still end up into about 3% of the people's hands who it is now. But of that 3%, there would be a change of 10% within that 3%, if that makes sense. Because there is that young up and coming Elon who came up from poor, from nothing, who is going to enter that 3% gap. And then there's that person who inherited some money who is going to drop out of that 3% gap. So that's why there's only going to be about a 10% change within that 3% where all the money is going to flow.
Right.
Because it's in the human nature that there's always just going to be someone who's a high performer. I don't care if we go back 10,000 years ago. There's going to be that motherfucker in our tribe who's like, why does he always kill the buffalo? Oh, he's a high performer. He's willing to take risks.
Right. Yeah. I think the actual just variation of nature and humans is going to always lead to outcomes of unequalness in terms of economic terms and pursuits of, like you said, ambitions and high accomplishments. That's always inevitably going to spill over, into no matter how we try to make it equal. We should just focus on life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, but we're never going to be economically equal no matter how. And to try to make laws was the Soviet Union's attempt to make everyone equal, and it failed colossally.
Dude, and there's great history about Sweden that I don't think a lot of people know about, that they try to do something similar.
Oh, yeah.
I'll try and go through this as quickly as I can. In the late 1800s, 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, Sweden was one of the wealthiest countries in the world. They had great inventors come out of Sweden. They had cash on cash. They were free market capitalism. And then in the 1910s and 1920s, they went full communist for about 10 years. And they said, whoa, this doesn't work. So we got to pull back. But they had all this capital, to fund these programs. And then they were like, let's just go socialism. And so they had capital to fund socialism programs. And if you look from like 1830 to all the way, 1930 to about 1980, they had 50 years of negative job growth.
I've heard that before, yeah. Where they had a lot of capital and then they tried to implement socialism, but then they just burned through all of it.
And then you're in a deficit like so many other countries doing that. I mean, that's what Rome did. Rome had a bunch of capital, the fall of the Roman Empire, and they did all these social programs. They had hyperinflation.
So then my hypothetical situation to where we could fix or implement communism, if you had so much excess resources and energy in that case, just say we had like a ridiculous amount of excess energy and resources, could you not implement everybody on a level plane, but at least implement people to...
You could bring the cost of living down drastically, and the quality of living up, but it wouldn't drastically by having zero cost of energy. And there are papers where you can do that.
Right.
Like
but it wouldn't be
baseline, so nobody's homeless and nobody's starving. But also allow market dynamics for the high performers to go after it if they want.
Yeah.
And then at least just have everyone, if you had enough resources, you could, in theory, and I think that's what we're talking about in terms of the UBI and like a base income and stuff, is moving to a point of having a baseline, but still allowing people to go after it if they want. And I'm generally of the type of like labor laws, for example, like the government should set some rules for an industry, but then otherwise let the high flyers compete within the industry. So set some ground rules and then go at it, basically, essentially. I don't fully believe that without any ground rules, people will do the right thing on their own, or these industries will do the right thing, because they also have demonstrated in many different countries and many different cultures that unless pressed to, they won't. The great example, of course, is every country that's and this is always a great example, is the very early of industrialization for each country. There's always a byproduct that's made that is a glue polymer, right? And this glue has the exact atomic weight of milk. like cow's milk, right? And Britain did it when they first industrialized. America did it, and China also did it. So totally, vastly different times and cultures, right? Over across about 150 years, they all, until pressed to, put this glue in the milk and sold it. Even China. So it's an exact example of if you don't set the ground rules, unfortunately, people just, the profit's too lovely, the margins are too nice. They just won't do the right thing. So besides setting the ground rules, though, if you start to say, I have to control every aspect of it, Soviet Union style, then it becomes unworkable. So you have to let the market flow, but there needs to be some ground rules, at least in my opinion, because I just seen demonstratively that they don't do it unless pressed to.
Now, in that hypothetical, if there was such an abundance of resources, wouldn't that make everybody like fiscally less successful? Does that make sense? Like,
right? Yeah, you have to wonder. Yeah,
go in a little bit more because I have a feeling I have an answer for you, but
like
just go in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, if the supply and demand of you, because like what makes someone rich is that there's a finite amount of money, right? Now, if there's so much resources, so much wealth that everybody was rich, then that kind of Pareto curve that you're talking about wouldn't really exist, or maybe it would flatten out.
Well, yeah,
that is the
everybody's
concept of
rich,
inflation, right?
Then it is inflated, and then the purchasing power of that currency just drops.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So you can't have everybody rich, but I feel like you could with if the United States truly was energy independent and we were exporting energy, you could almost bring the cost for citizens down to almost zero.
Right.
And that's across the country, implementing nuclear, geothermal, solar, etc. If we truly implemented those things in the United States, I mean, and even you still are going to have to use coal throughout a certain part of this to transition to all of those. We could make like I was saying, the quality of living go up, the cost of living go down. And then with AI, I feel like our government, with the trillions that they're spending, they'll eventually enter some sort of UBI. But kind of how Alex was saying earlier, there's still going to be this gap between high performers.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But my fear is that it's going to cause too much complacency. And then you're just going to have Indian reservations with a bunch of white, brown, and black people, all the colors.
Right. I can't help but agree. I remember growing up with people, and they had a lot of government supports and system. And you would think that would be a great opportunity to pull yourself up by the bootstraps, but instead not often, but sometimes would lead to just absolute degeneracy at home. You're just like, oh my goodness, this is crazy here. So I do struggle with that. Like UBI could bring a lot for a lot of people, bring some stability, but man, could it bring some weird counterculture societies that just dwell in weird worlds. Yeah,
we would hope ideally that if people had that like extra resources, maybe they weren't trying to become a high performer, that everyone was going for their morning run, they were hitting the gym, they were taking care of their bodies, so then it brings healthcare costs down. Because they have the time. They're putting in the work with their kids, so their kids aren't on the streets. Their kids aren't fucking failing basic ass school.
Right.
We're improving the psychological, the cognitive development of our kids because we have people at home, at least one caretaker, one parent at home with these kids. You would hope that that's the direction we go, but you get that one person who's unhappy. And they're just at home fucking drinking or smoking and just watching TV all day. And their kid is right there. And then they're a disease to all those people in their circle. Well, why don't you just come over and hang out and we'll have a beer. We don't have to fucking work no more, man. Government's taking care of all of us and our bills are still being paid. It's just, where's the cancer? How far does it spread? And how far does the other half of the country be like, guess what? We're going to make this the best life we can make it. I don't know what the answer is.
That's the hard part is to limit the proportions. You're going to have, I believe, because just like variations in human populations and stuff, you're going to have some useless, some high achievers, some middle ground, and that's going to always disperse, but reducing the amount of like blobs that, is what the focus should be on, because
So
that's a tough one.
yeah, to me, I think there's a deeper problem underlying that, where even today, where there's like just no purpose for anybody really. There's like a very facade, materialistic purpose for everybody that doesn't really give people like motivation to pursue what you're talking about in that sense.
Right.
So it's
Right.
there's a much deeper underlying thing that I think humans
They
in America
were interviewing some
has to
people
deal
who
with.
lived in those coffin homes in Hong Kong and stuff, And I think it speaks to the UBI thing only in the sense that a lot of people just really don't want to be rich necessarily. Like they dream about it and stuff like that, but they'd actually be just content with life, with just an actual home instead of a coffin thing that they're living in, And they asked them, like, what would you like? And they didn't say, a green grass and a big house and all that stuff. They're just like a bathroom and a kitchen that are separate, and separate rooms, and that's it. Basic amenities. And I hope I'm not the only one. I could do more, but I don't want to. I'm content with what I have. So that's exactly an example of, like, if you don't want to pursue to be rich, then this society is geared for that, and that's great. But and perhaps better pursuits than other ones we've tried to go for in history as societies. But if that isn't your thing, then a lot of those folks do feel somewhat like, But I'd say, hey, if those people want it, I'm in this society, I can do whatever, and if they want to go after it, they can. That's what's great about society too, as it is right now. Is if you're not a high flyer and you're content with just a little bit, then that's cool, And then let those who want to go after it.
And Alex, I think you're not giving yourself enough credit. You're being very humble when you say that you are content, because you are someone who plays a long game with his money, and you are someone who is continuously trying to improve your own education and knowledge and your whereabouts as a human. So I just ask that you use those words lightly on saying that you are content, because you are not a human that is content
for sure
when you're talking generally about life.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, for sure. Like, I don't want Lamborghinis, I guess, to be more specific. I don't really care or want Lamborghinis or a large house. To me, those are huge maintenance problems. That's all I see them as. And after that week of like, ooh, fresh car smell, it's like now it's just a huge burden, both financially and to manage, and if I crash, etc. But in terms of knowledge, I could definitely say I'm not content, and I am voraciously hungry, and almost have seemed to be since the day I was born for some reason. I don't know why, but
yeah, and even with your finances, you like to play that long game. Let's invest in these long-term assets. Let's
for sure, yeah,
sit on these long-term stocks. So also not content
NVIDIA.
when it's like, hey, guess what? Yeah, we definitely got to give them props. I actually wanted to bring that up the other day about when you called out NVIDIA on when you were telling us, hey guys, we should buy NVIDIA. And then I wanted to toot my own horn when I was like, hey guys, now that Facebook was down, when it was at like $79, we should buy Facebook. And Alex had already bought some. So I wanted to throw out some props to Alex on both of those stock picks right there.
And I think that's a good point. That's a great point that I want to make the distinction. I like pursuing the knowledge of that, but taking that money and then buying something with it, like a Lamborghini, I guess, is the part where that doesn't interest me. But you are right. You are right in the sense that I do enjoy the learning about that, and taking advantage of the knowledge that I acquired. That's fun, and I will do that my whole life. Absolutely. And
yeah,
for sure.
I think what you're also alluding to here, Alex, is that there's like a deeper subconscious consumerism in today's, that like people just consume and consume without any kind of like regard to like purpose. In that sense, they're just consuming to consume.
Right. That's why I wanted to kind of compare when he was talking about the people in China. It's like, but what about the culture in the United States?
Right.
If you go to 99% of the people in the United States, they want the big house and with the big old grassy white picket fence with the like Escalade and the Lamborghini in the driveway. They want those things because it's the culture that we've provided, but it's also because of the foundation of this country allowed for the American dream. There's no such thing as the Russian dream, the fucking German dream, the Chinese dream, or the Africa dream.
But
Everybody wants
Double-edged
that
sword.
American dream.
if you
Yeah.
come here, you want that. You want the palace and the that's part of the package deal.
It's an expectation. Yeah.
Dude, there's
Absolutely.
places even in Singapore and Hong Kong where it's like they are literally trying to Americanize. They import American cars. They get American style looking housing developments built that look like it's straight out of just Southern California. And they all speak English. You know, they're just able to make their money in those countries.
Right.
You know, those couple little countries that allow that sudden prosperity gain in the last 2 decades. But you go to any American, and I would put my money that they want the things that this culture has said. Now, has it got out of control? Yes. When you look at our credit card debt, when you look at the mortgage debt, when you look at the car debt, it's gotten out of control. And I think we all need to be humbled, give some humble pie, eat that stuff up really quick. It actually isn't going to be quick. It's going to be a kind of a long, painful ride. But we got to just be willing to take it on the chin in the United States. Because in the fucking 40s, 50s, dude, those guys had it so fucking good. When you look at the purchasing power of the dollar, when you looked at the income, how much a car costs compared to your annual income, a house compared to your annual income, healthcare compared to your annual income, and only fucking the dude worked. The woman stayed home, looked hot, took care of the kids. You had a hot meal in the morning and a hot meal at night. We're ready for you. How do we get back to this?
I was watching a show about Gary, Indiana that kind of plays into that because Gary, Indiana was one of America's largest steel manufacturing zones, and it's kind of part of the bigger story of the Rust Belt. What I was shocked to find out in this whole thing is that the United States is actually at the highest steel production it has ever been. But because of automation, Gary, Indiana, that major plant that employed all the people at that town, the town's dying. It was the show was about the town dying. And then employed at its peak at 30,000 people, right? It now employs less than 3,000, even though the total peak steel output is the same or higher than it was. And so it's those kind of things that are changing the dynamics, and why just saying we're going to bring the jobs back is not that simple. It's not, we don't work on the line like we did in 70 and 50 and et cetera. How to get back to that while having the economic and technological advancements of our time is going to be the real tricky one, and one that clearly both of our political leaders and our economic leaders have not managed well, in my opinion. They just seem to have not managed this transition of automation, manufacturing efficiencies. So not even on automation, like they'll just improve on like the same process, but make it more efficient, and just that alone will reduce a couple jobs there and et cetera. So even those kind of processes continue to happen, but it doesn't seem to be reciprocated in better pay and more people with jobs, good jobs. We all can feel that, I think. And that's a really tough structural problem for America.
I mean, not to doom and gloom America too much, but Detroit in the 1950s was the wealthiest city in the entire world. Detroit, Michigan.
It was booming. Oh my goodness.
And now that place, no offense, all my Detroit friends, that place is a dump.
Yes. They keep trying to put articles that it's recovering, but you could do a quick search of the properties there. It doesn't seem like it is. So you could buy cheap housing there, and you shouldn't be able to in booming Detroit.
I guess, is it worth talking about who is to blame for things like Detroit, or how do we fix it? Or
it's so tough because it's
both conversations?
I was thinking, what with Gary Anda, who is to blame? Is it the steel plant who automated all these jobs away? Is it the bigger economic decisions that actually sent a lot of the steel that we were making in the 70s to buy it from China instead? It's all these combined, because it's really, that's what I think. It's so easy. We want to blame one person, but the difficult part
entity.
But it's actually like a layered cake, and we're like trying to unsort it.
Do you guys think at some point we're gonna have to decide, like, because right now we think of work as like the purpose and it fulfills what we need, right? But at some point there's not going to be enough work for everyone to fulfill that. So there's going to be like, a new way, a new path of purpose that we're going to need to identify in that sense.
I think it brings us back to the UBI a little bit in the sense that we bring a baseline for everybody because there's just simply there's too many jobs automated away. And then that's the moment each person shows its own character, though, like what Jesse was saying. Some are now going to go start running, go raise their kids right, and others are going to turn into degenerates.
Blobs, yeah.
Yeah.
Just become static. Yeah.
Yeah, and how are we going to navigate that is going to be real interesting because you can't help but think that those blobs are going to cause social bleed over into other problems.
Because, yeah, automation's only going to exponentially get worse, or not worse, I guess, but better, depending on how you look at it. So it's like we're going to have to start having these conversations here about that soon, obviously.
And the only politician I know that wasn't he? You know who I'm talking about, Ty? What was his name?
Andrew Yang.
Andrew Yang.
Mm-hmm.
He's the only one actually really discussing this, and all the rest seem to not even think it's a thing yet. And I would say on the ground, we're kind of feeling that. If they used to have 30,000 good paying jobs for these steel workers, and now they don't have them.
That's like direct evidence. And I think Andrew Yang, personally, I think he came out into the public like a little too early. I think if he would have come out maybe like within this year or maybe within a couple of years, he would actually have bigger impact. He kind of
was that dude who was too early to market.
He's like,
when the market wasn't ready.
Exactly.
In the corner with the sign yelling "the world is ending" kind of guy.
I think that's fair.
Yeah. Even though we've talked about this for how many years? Like 30 years now.
And it's one of those kind of
stuff.
It's one of those frog in a boiling pot things. It's not going to rush all at once. It's slowly boiling on us, and we're all sitting in the pot not realizing it. And that's the scary thing about it. Like, no one's setting the alarm bells because each year it just kind of a little less jobs, a little less good paying jobs.
And because and it's instead of frogs, it's lobsters. It's all the politicians just pulling the other lobster back in. Don't talk about that.
The crab in the bucket.
Any extra
crab in the bucket.
Yes, don't talk about that. We'll pull you back down in the boiling water.
Get back in your line. Exactly.
What about
that adds to the problem. That adds to the problem.
It needs to be talked about sooner than later. Otherwise, it's one of those things that's like, oh, it's too late. So then the government thinks they need to just grasp a hold of it.
Yeah,
and it'll never let go.
Yeah, needs to be reactive, not reactive, or proactive, not reactive.
Yes, exactly.
Let the high flyers use the new tools that automation and AI are going to bring, and wow, look at their productivity go. That's my positive outlook of the future, and I look at that, and I'm like, some of these guys like Elon, if they had the tools that AI can really live up to, their productivity would shoot beyond even what they achieved already. On the other hand, that means they don't need all the people that they need around them now. A lot of them, And so in that sense, what do we do? And I think the UBI would be a good example because all the governments and everybody knows what happens to huge masses of people without jobs. From ancient Rome to now. That's well documented. People without jobs.
Especially large groups of males.
Yes.
Men. Exactly. Male especially. Yeah.
Then you have political problems that are totally separate from the economy. And many of the countries like Egypt and stuff that can't provide enough jobs for their youth, they just have constant ISIS type, just like waves of it. It just comes in waves. Young people who are frustrated, a lot of them, you'd be surprised how many of them have really good degrees and actual degrees from even London schools, but none of them can actually get jobs in their home country at all. So they just come in waves where if you spend enough time and you're a smart guy and you're ambitious, imagine if you're totally cock-blocked from any opportunities and eventually you're going to look elsewhere. It would not be inevitable. It doesn't need to be. You don't need a political scientist to do a study to tell you that if you're constantly blocked from any great opportunities, you're going to start to look at other opportunities like political violence and such. ISIS, Al Qaeda. In that case, and of course, in the West had their own national, hyper nationalist group like fascists and the Nazis, etc. So remember the brown shirts formed from the huge masses of unemployed in Germany. So these are ex-soldiers from World War I, and now they're all out of their jobs, all their steel working jobs, all their great, good paying middle class jobs. They're all getting wiped out. And so they just start hanging out on the street and start congregating in groups and start telling crazy things about each other and about it's all the Jews' fault and et cetera, and all this nonsense. And then they started fighting with the communists in the street, and before you know it, one thing led to the other. So that's we know what the alternative is if we don't actually do anything and just have these people without jobs. Is my point.
Right.
We
Right.
do need to think of something going forward. UBI seems like it's got its own problems, but we do have documented history of what happens if we just let it go, and do nothing.
Let everybody burn. Yeah.
Yeah, if there truly isn't jobs for them, it's one thing if there is jobs and they're not doing it. Obviously that's a different thing. But if there truly isn't enough to feed the market, enough people, enough jobs for the people on the market, then that is a problem, is a genuine problem. And other countries face that today, like Egypt.
So if we even get to UBI, how the fuck do we pay for it? We can't even pay for the shit we got now going.
Right. Oh yeah, totally. Exactly. That's exactly. But no one wants. That's the problems no one wants to talk about. Is there the high flyers and the ones who do automate and reduce the amount of workers are going to have to take on larger amounts of the burden, and that is a fortunate thing. And it's only going to encourage them to go to like the Cayman Islands or go to some place where they're actually can be not taxed. So they're now outside of the American tax system in some way or another. That's what often they do in that case. So that would you have those problems we're going to face, and that will only increase for them to go look elsewhere, I would say, if you're trying to increase their burden on it. But you also have to think, if you are going to make a huge amount of profit from your automated production in America, shouldn't you be a patriot and stay in America and pay for that? How much do they need? I guess it comes back to our thing of the other day of the CEOs and 350. If you have automated and all that wealth is now concentrating into further smaller hands, wouldn't it make sense that they would have to take on a larger burden? But it's not an easy solution. And I think that's exactly gets to the point of where politicians can promise the world, but nothing ever seems to get done in regards to these promises, because it's a difficult thing to untangle. Very difficult to untangle. Extremely.
So Alex, I'm going to play devil's advocate on you.
For sure.
You mentioned these companies being patriotic and staying in America.
Right.
Where is the line? And I'm just playing devil's advocate. Where is the line from too much government regulation and too much government taxes on those corporations to where they're like, all right, we were being pretty patriotic, but we were blue in the face because we were losing oxygen. So we had to go down to Mexico, Brazil, China.
Right. And that's where the moral line comes in, and it is definitely very difficult. And they've basically been trying to debate that, how much is too much forever, right? And it changes with time and things. But I think a good benchmark is what we talked about last time. A 20-1 is acceptable. You're still buying a few palaces and some yachts and stuff for the average employee. 350-1 is where it perhaps is getting really distorted in the market. And then you can imagine these future AI high flyer trillionaires will be 700-1, and then so you got to wonder how much is actually too much. And then we want to say, okay, well, what about just 300-1, and but who decides that? How is that line decided? Super untangly and very difficult. And everyone has an opinion probably on that number.
Yeah. And I'm talking more specifically, how can we bring manufacturing back? Because the reason they send it away is not
labor
so
cost.
The CEO can just increase his individual pay.
Right.
There's taxes, regulation, their bottom line, payroll tax. Just there's so much. Payroll is the biggest expense.
Right.
And it's like, but if we have all these regulation and taxes from the federal level coming down on us, and then if you're in California, theirs coming down on top, how do we get them to keep these forward, to keep these manufacturing plants only in the United States? How do we keep Apple from keep your phones in the United States, create something in Texas or South Dakota or Nevada where all the phones are not designed in California, but they're actually manufactured in America?
Right.
Because that's why we move them out.
It's labor costs initially. And that's where that's the hardest part is essentially we're competing against 1 billion humans in China who are also competing in their own labor market. And each one will work a little bit less than the one next to them. to keep their job. And we did that in America. So you remember the steel, we forget now, but the steel mills and stuff, it was hard work for not a good amount of pay, relatively speaking. It was good, but you were working hard for that. And each one would do, try to undo the other kind of thing in an attempt to get the job. These kind of labor market shenanigans is played on a larger scale when China began to industrialize. That is the hard part, and why it's easy to say bring the jobs back, but it just can't be a flip of a switch. It's very difficult because you simply can't compete with the labor costs of a Chinese worker, at least unless if you really want to make what they make. And I think if we're really realistic about that with our costs in America, our cost of living, et cetera, and also what we want for ourselves, the picket fence, the stuff, I think it'd be unrealistic to expect American workers to do the same wages of the Chinese worker. And then you add on top. So all that's the main, to my from my understanding, and I definitely could always learn more about this, but that's the major chunk of the labor market problems with in terms of why they move jobs overseas. But then you have this whole other cake of regulation. So then the government adds on top of it the increased burden. So reducing this to as little and getting this as lean and mean as you possibly can gives you your best chance to still wrestle with the much larger and problematic issue of the labor costs. And that's where bringing the jobs back is not going to work, because basically what they're proposing this time is to compete with Chinese labor and Indian labor is automation, right? The worker, then you automate it. They can work 24/7, don't need any healthcare, don't need any, they just work all the time. Then we can literally bring American manufacturing back. Yes. But can we bring those jobs back? The general consensus at this point is no, unless you're competing against Chinese labor prices. You see what I'm saying? That's a difficult. That's very difficult. You got two cross winds basically, right? You want to bring actual jobs back and manufacturing, but to bring it back here, you need to automate. But you're not going to bring the jobs back then.
Right. Go ahead, Jesse. Mine might be a tangent. So go ahead.
You go, because I felt like Alex you were at the end, you were getting towards what my point is, because maybe I'm just too hopeful, but I feel like companies wouldn't have ever left if there wasn't those giant tax burdens that have only been accumulating since the days of Henry Ford. They haven't been reducing. Right. And the regulation, and I'm not saying all regulation is bad, because I don't need 8-year-olds building my Ford F-150 in the state of Michigan.
Right, exactly.
So I agree with, and I'm just going to use a round number of, I would get rid of 80 to 90% of regulations. Because Elon Musk even said the reason he didn't build a plant in California and he went with Nevada is because it would have taken 2 years before he could even break ground. In the state of Nevada, the county he was in, they made sure they could break ground in less than 6 months, and they were already going. So there are problems, massive problems.
I 100% agree. Essentially, our best chance to compete with the labor issue is by absolutely 80 to 90% slashing the regulation that at this point is reaching absurd levels. I was watching a thing about the homeless issue in LA, and they had even passed $1 billion bond approved by the voters to build these temporary homes for them, right? This thing is an absolute disaster. It's like 8 years behind schedule. It's still not even close to being built. Out of 10,000 homes, they've built like 3,000, and all the money's already spent. Or it's on.
There's
it's
so many cases of that. Yeah,
there's so many cases of that. Yeah.
Yeah, like a bus stop, and they tried to redo a bus stop, but it like took millions of dollars to do a fucking bus stop, and they couldn't even get that right. Just like little things like that.
No one's held to account. Oftentimes, these people aren't even taken out of office. They don't even lose office. They stay for being totally incompetent.
So
Howard,
this might be a fool's hope, but is there a possibility that with the rise of automation and AI, that the free market will generate enough competition to kind of, hold these people here in America to the point where, it's probably improbable that anybody will compete with Apple at this point. But do you think it is possible that there is people who will, competition within the free market will arise?
So
enough to bring us out of that, you know?
yeah, so how we were talking about earlier, AI is going to, Alex stated it, AI is going to allow someone like Elon to do his job more efficient, but in turn, he loses some of his engineers because he doesn't need them. But that same fucking group of engineers,
That's what I was
a couple
thinking.
of them can pair up, use the same AI tools, and come up with something and be competitive.
It might not be as good, but it'll be competitive or, you know, close to
it could even be in a completely different field because they're thinking of something else. Who wants to go up against Elon? But why not go up against these hundreds of other companies? Because you have some of the best engineers who are let go from a Tesla or a SpaceX, and they're like, you know what? People need this. This is a viable product. We can use these AI tools. We don't need a lot of capital because of the AI tools helps us, and there's only 4 of us, and we can be productive and competitive, and it's going to improve the quality of life of the everyday citizen. Those things will happen if you truly allow a free market to just kind of thrive.
The great example is IBM in the tech market. IBM was the dominant. It was the Apple, and everyone was like, no one's ever going to contest IBM. They are the big monolithic beast, right? And so Bill Gates and all these guys were in their garages and tinkering around with their devices, and now their companies are the big giant titans. So Steve Jobs and etc. That same cycle, if we allow it to and allow the market to do its thing. With that said, that always employs a small amount relative of people, you know, and those opportunities is always going to be a small amount. But at the same time, that's the opportunities that you can provide if you get government out of the way and allow innovation to do its thing.
Okay. That's what I was going to say. Also, with the automation and AI, could that pool get bigger? You know what I mean? Could that pool you're referring to, Alex, get larger in a sense? Hopefully.
Exactly. It's going to be really interesting. I think it's always going to be what it has been. The AI tools will allow the big money players to leverage their tools better, but also but also the tech tools that emerged in the 80s and 90s allowed people tinkering in their garage to start billion-dollar, trillion-dollar startups. So you'll have always both. It won't completely remove either's advantage, but both will have to deal with the market dynamics. If Apple becomes sclerotic like IBM did and doesn't adapt and really run with the times, then some startup in the garage is literally going to come up and replace them. And but if Apple leverages their huge amount of wealth using the tools, then they can continue to command a strong lead. But often these companies become so hard to manage that they often lose their lead. It happens over and over again. So I'm going to say most likely it's that same process will happen. There's going to be new startups that will eventually dethrone Apple and all of them for sure using new technology.
Another example is General Electric. At one point, GE was one of the biggest companies in the entire world. They were on the S&P 500 for 100 years, and now they're a fucking penny stock.
Exactly. There's so many great examples of like these were titans of their industry. Nobody could touch them in their time, you know. And to think that you challenge them, their parents and their families are like in the garage doing a startup, like you're wasting your time. This is a dumb thing, you know, to do. And sure enough, they start up a huge, great, innovative company. So that will continue to happen.
If we have a free market capitalism in the United States, people will take any tool that we have. Just because there's automation and AI doesn't mean that everyone's just going to be sitting on their hands. People are going to be able to use these tools and to be either more efficient at their job or to create something new, because it's just inherently in our DNA. We didn't just stop at the wheel and then stop at fire. We were like, hey, what else can we make? And we're going to continue to do that. And it's not going to, I don't think there's going to just be a conglomerate. It's going to be Tesla, Apple, Microsoft, and Google. Those are going to be the only people in the world. There are going to be so many other companies. And how would you not be satisfied still being a multi-billion-dollar company, even if you're not $1 trillion in the $1 trillion club? And you created that just because you were laid off because of some automated AI tools.
And what's kind of hilarious is kind of showing of the big companies is the IBMs. They eventually fail against the startups for exactly the same problems that plagued the government California bonds. So much bureaucracy builds up in these corporations that they themselves can no longer be as agile and as functional as they once were. So they, in turn, don't see the new big thing that's coming right at them, and the tech guys on the ground in the garage did, and then whoop, they lost their van.
Yeah, essentially they just rot on the inside because they're so blinded of what the actual people want.
Right.
And I don't mean want as in like what they're demanding. Steve Jobs once said that the American people don't know what they want because he was looking on a macro level forward. And he said they want a fucking computer in their hand. So that's what he meant by they don't know what they want. Because at first it's like, who wants to
stay the same?
Ford said the same thing. Because he goes, people just want faster horses, but they're wrong. You can't make faster fucking horses. You're not putting thoroughbreds on the front of your car. Or the front of your chariot, I should say. So yes, he said the same thing. Yes. So the people who understand human behavior on a macro level, they're going to fucking succeed, man.
Absolutely.
Well, it's crazy. It ties back into what I was talking about earlier about the individual and the collectivism, or the collective, you know, because like Apple has become the collective, but it's become so like malnourished that from the individuals inside can't keep the collective alive.
And even the bureaucratic structures, like at the end of the day, you have to submit a report on little checklists and shit like that. You should be in there innovating. You should be in a garage innovating, but you spend all your time doing checklists. It becomes so bureaucratic, and they add all these little rules of nonsense, and the corporations get so bloated with managing just that they're not even focusing on. Their just main focus is now to provide faster horses, and no longer actually,
which no one needs,
which no one actually. They want something new.
They didn't know that that's not what they wanted.
Yes.
Or even in this day and age, another piece of rot on the inside of these major corporations is when your internal giant group of workers, your pool, because you have your management, your CEOs, and then you have this big chunk of your employees who are telling the company, why aren't we funding all these political agendas? Why aren't we focused on this? It's because we make fucking phones and computers.
Right.
No. We should be putting our resources towards this political group, and I just want safe places. And those things have actually been problems with inside some of the biggest companies.
Absolutely.
I mean, Coinbase CEO literally held a meeting with every one of his employees and told them, we're not talking about politics. That is not part of our missions and values. It's not going to be a thing. And he was being brave to do that.
The de facto result is you're draining resources that has no productive use for your initial company's reason to exist. And whether you could try, they spin it and try to do all the ways they can, sugarcoat it, but in the end, you're pulling resources away from the company's main task. And
attention from your employees, their productivity and energy is being pulled away from the mission.
And often their money, and the companies themselves have to take either losses in one way or pay for something in another. They're literally making money resources losses to do things that don't originally focus on making faster horses.
I mean, Bud Light is a great example because it was an internal decision. Their buyer doesn't care about the political message that they were saying. That's not who their consumer is. But internally, they were saying, we're the number one sold beer company, number one sold beer brand in the United States. Let's do this thing over here. Let's get political. And they went from number 1 to number 4.
What a disaster. That has been an absolute disaster. And I think that's a great example. You have this big company, and they're all checking off their lists every day at work, but no one thought to say, let's look at who buys our beer and what would happen if we did do this program. It's amazing when stuff like that happens, because these companies have they're supposed to have so many layers of people to check to prevent this from happening. And the fact that it happens so often and with so many companies, you're just like, wow, what are you guys actually doing at your jobs? Because I'm sure there's people whose their main job was to exactly study data and see what was going to happen in these kind of scenarios.
I think a lot in that case is a lot of these people are coming out of college, and this might be biased on my own, they have that ideology kind of in their head from college and from wherever they kind of came from. So that's kind of which is a continuation of our.
It is the bubble problem,
That's a whole
and
nother
we all have
talk,
that to a degree. They're in a bubble, and they actually genuinely believe the rest of America thinks like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
That's probably a
that
wake
kind
up
of thing.
call on
Yeah.
their end.
I mean, I think you're exactly right, Tyler. Not just, it could be. I think
I
you're
am biased.
I mean, you nailed it on the head, but it's like from a corporate level, like how do executives just go like, yeah, that one's good. Like
Right.
somebody had to have said like, what the fuck are we doing?
Somebody had to, and it's going to come out in some book, I'm sure someday. But it's one of those that's just like they have filters because these become such disasters. They take on a life of their own. That there's all these PR departments and there's all this blah blah blah, and their whole main thing is in a sense to try to prevent this. And wow, they misread the room really bad.
It'd be one thing if it was like Lululemon or Victoria's Secret, and even though probably a vast majority of conservative women buy those brands, women work more off emotions. Men work off more factual and data. So they're going to go, that's not a woman, that is a dude because he was born with a dick.
Right.
So I don't have empathy for you saying that this woman is going to be the spokesperson for my beer because that woman kind of actually has a dick.
And all the politics tied up with it, it's toxic to me. Why would I buy a beer to encourage this toxicity if I feel this way? And they exactly did not take that into account when the majority clearly of their buyers felt that way. Wow, spectacular failure. And it happens more often than we think. It's like we see them all the time, news articles about some company really taking a massive loss when they do something stupid,
Yeah, not to get, this might bring us on a whole nother topic, but it's like, if we consider the population of what we're talking about, like the trans demographic, how do companies justify selling to that demographic when it's such a small percentage?
What is it? Like less than the actual
4, I believe, or something like that. But it's just interesting. There has to be another layer there where, and I don't want to say it's like George Soros or something, but I think it's funded, and there's other things going on in the background there.
I think it could definitely be amount of who's funding certain of these programs. I think also what is interesting too is it's the old soapbox effect. So say you're in a crowd of people and there's a person with soapbox. They're saying crazy stuff, but because they're the ones speaking and most of the other people in the crowd are silent, there's a perception that it's a bigger and more important thing than it is. And I think that, and social media has only taken that and amplified it by enormous scales, and millions of people of crowds that are silent, essentially, and they were the people who were buying Bud Light until this happened. They didn't care. That was the last thing on their mind when they were thinking about buying their beer, and they were a silent crowd. They had their own opinions on trans stuff. But the people who were loudly broadcasting that this was important seemed to convince the right people that it was, even though percentage-wise in population of the America and everything, it was trivial, completely, absolutely. It seemed to be a trivial thing, relatively. I only seek that everyone treats equally. I don't really care about the details of that. I think most people, that huge silent amount, would. Often agree. But there could be a funding aspect to it too on top of it. So then on top of that, where you got the amplifier effect, then you have some that are throwing money towards specific cases and causes to try to further amplify.
Or just to create, not diversity, decisiveness, or what am I trying to think of?
Divisiveness,
division,
yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm,
division,
sure.
Yeah. I could see that.
A lot of those issues, I think they make up such a small portion of the population. With a lot of these issues, you're just like, I think they should be addressed that they're treated fairly. But beyond that, why are we devoting so much money, time, and attention to this when it makes up such a relatively small part of the population? And the reason why I say that is because there's so many other things we need to address on a much larger scale and to address to a much larger amount of the population. So to put them ahead of so many more people and so many more things that need to be addressed, just doesn't that seem I can see why conspiracy theories grow exactly from that, because you're ignoring like a huge mass of the population that has problems, and you're putting like a tiny little percentage and its problems way ahead of the vast majority
That's
of
where
these people. That's
yeah.
like, yeah, and that's
Like
frustrating.
the
to
only
everybody.
reason, and like the only logical reason why anybody would do that would be to create divisiveness, and it would be a reason, maybe not
Right.
the only reason, but
That's
would be
true.
a reason.
Yeah.
You know?
I agree with
So
that.
it's like that's why I get why conspiracy theories do pop up.
Absolutely.
So,
I can totally see from that root is where it grows. You know what I mean?
mm-hmm.
It's like the seed that's planted. I'm not saying, I'm not totally validating their problems, but they also make up such a small amount of the population. And there's so many other problems that we do need to address that address so many more hundreds of millions of Americans, that shouldn't they be addressed first and more priority? Wouldn't that be fair to say? I would feel so, but I guess I'm not the loudest in the room or whatever.
There's all sorts of things wrapped up in that. I feel like that would probably take a whole episode.
Right.
Yeah, we could go over that next week.
Yeah.
For sure.
All right, boys. Well, I am going to wrap it up.
Perfect.
We did a little Thursday thunder right there.
Nice.
Killed it.
Rolling thunder.
Oh, yeah. Howard, you want to close this out?
Welcome to the High Mark podcast. Join us next week. Later.
Yes. Thank you, guys. Click subscribe, hit the like button, share it with your friends.
Leave some comments, all that.
Yeah.
All the engagement. Thanks.
If you want to hear our wise opinions on anything, just leave a comment.
And leave some comments on some of the things we talked about if you disagree or if you have some more information on it. It just as a little side note, I did some research on the Chinese wages, and the gap has grown significantly smaller between America. It still is a gap, but it's much smaller than it was even when we were kids. So if anyone has any more input on that, feel free. Stuff like that.
Fucking cut those taxes and regulation and bring those fucking jobs home. It'll
Let's do it.
Cover that gap.
Exactly.
And then if anyone in the comment section thinks we're wrong or idiots, you're mistaken someone who doesn't give a fuck. So
and let us know why, so we can tell you why we think differently.
Why we don't give a fuck.
Yep. All right.
Peace, fellas.
See you guys. Hold on, wait. I gotta hit stop.
Thanks, guys.
For sure.